Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, Priscilla and Domino. And today we're back on the Circle G Ranch, and we're going to have more stories about being on the Circle G. We're going to start with a song. Hello, Keith. Hello, Gunn. Thank you so much for coming. And today, we'll start with Cross on the Circle.
He saw the cross at dawn and said, "It's a good omen, and a dream again." At the break of dawn, through the window pane, he saw a cross in morning rain, white as grace, tall as prayer, calling him to build and share. Not a kingdom, not a throne, but a place of love alone, where laughter rides on horse's breath and peace outshines the fear of death. Come home to the circle and the sign, where the lake reflects the holy line. No one needs money, no one needs fame, just a handshake and a name. Come home where the cross stands tall. Come and share the love of all. Mobile homes and barbecue nights, trucks and trowels and porch light rides, the hand-picked heart to share the dream, a mythic village by the stream. This is more than land, it's grace, refuge carved in sacred space, a gift of love to friends and kin, protected from the world's loud din. Come home to the circle and the sign, where the lake reflects the holy line. No one needs money, no one needs fame, just a handshake and a name. Come home, where the cross stands strong. Come and share the love of all. Oh, come and share the love of all.
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today we're going to hear the echoes of Priscilla and her horse Domino, the horse that Elvis gifted to her for Christmas 1966, and which wasn't the very first horse, but is the horse that started this journey that lands us here today, sometime in May or early June 1967, at a point just after somebody lost their wedding ring. We don't know exactly who lost their wedding ring, I think most of us have probably made up our mind as to who did. But somebody lost a symbol of the vows of the marriage. And it seems that at that point, some things began to go downhill. And let's hear from Mike McGregor. And Mike is the man who told us that the ring that was lost was not Elvis's ring, that it was Priscilla's. And Mike McGregor says Priscilla came out to the barn a few days later, all by herself. She wanted to ride Domino. She said, "Can you bring her out, Mike?" I unlatched the stall gate and reached up to get Domino's saddle off the wall peg. And Priscilla put that little hand of hers on my arm. And she said, "No saddle, Mike." She saw that worried look in my face. "Don't worry, Mike. I'll be careful." She walked past me into Domino's stall, got hold of its mane, and pulled herself up. She kicked its sides, and Domino trotted out of the stall and hit the outdoors flying. Halfway up the ridge where she lost the diamond, Domino swerved. Priscilla's knees couldn't hold her on its back, and she went flying through the air over Domino's shoulder. When I ran up to where she was sitting in a mud puddle, a streak on her cheek, Priscilla was laughing. Domino turned and looked at her, then walked back with a whinny. Priscilla got up and headed back toward the cottage with the bottom of her riding pants heavy with mud. As I watched her go, it struck me that Priscilla was having some bad luck. She never did get back up on that lost diamond ridge, as far as any of us know. That lost diamond ring is still up there, somewhere. And Marion says that she believes Priscilla lost her ring. And Keith says that it's funny, but last night he watched the movie Tickle Me, and Elvis Presley was very slim in November of '64 and played a rodeo horse riding instructor. Great movie. Yeah, he had a lot of experience with horses, more than most people give him credit for. Hello, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. But Mike McGregor has told us that he's told us a lot of things here. One is that Priscilla has a lot of courage. It's not everybody who can walk out and jump on a horse with no saddle and take off. Horses are big animals, and they're scary if you've never been up on one. And even if you have been up on one, they're animals that you respect because they can hurt you very easily. They are very, very large. And you don't control them as much as they submit to your control. And so without any means of control, you don't have a rein and you don't have a saddle. You got a lot of trust with that horse. And you must be pretty good at communicating with it. So she must be pretty good with horses. But she wasn't good enough to stay on the back of that horse when it stopped too fast. And that's one of the reasons you ride it with a saddle with stirrups. And then she was sitting in the mud puddle, but she didn't complain. She just got up, and I don't think she cleaned up because she didn't take the horse back to the stable. She left that for Mike to do. But then again, that's Mike's job. And she went on back to the cottage with pants full of mud. But she didn't look at Mike and say it was too hard or that she was angry that she'd done it or that she was angry at the horse. She seems to have just took it in stride, and she was laughing. But like Mike says, it seems like she's having some bad luck. It doesn't really matter whose ring got lost. There's some bad luck there. And Keith says he wonders if she still rides today. Yeah, I don't know today. I mean, I wouldn't if I was her, but she may. I mean, I'm sure she still has a relationship with horses. And Marion says that Priscilla was a very good rider. You can see in her face that she loved riding. Well, that's an excellent transition, Marion. Let's take a look at Priscilla riding a horse. So, I believe this is Domino. And it must be cold outside because she's wearing a bundle on her head. I don't think that's a riding helmet or safety equipment. I think it's just keeping her head warm. But you guys tell me what you think. Now, she's also wearing some gloves, some leather gloves you can see to protect her hands from the leather reins. And you can see the padding in the saddle. I guess that's a horse blanket. Looks like a pretty thick and nice horse blanket. And she looks like she is enjoying herself quite a bit. There's a house behind them. I don't know what house that is. I'm wondering if that's the house that they knocked down with the bulldozer that was on the Graceland property. And Chillin in Canada says she was atop a horse in the recent Equestrian Mag photo shoot with her grandparents or with her granddaughters. That's interesting. So she's not afraid to get up there. I don't know exactly how old she is. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think she's right at 80 or just over, right? So, I mean, I'm not at her age, but I wouldn't get up on a horse. I don't know about you guys, but I was never as comfortable on a horse as she was. I've maybe been on 2 horses in my life. I was on an elephant once too, but that's slightly different. And Mike McGregor, he learned metalsmithing during night classes at Memphis Art Academy, where he enrolled upon the advice of Elvis. So during this period, when they're on the ranch and Elvis has met Mike McGregor, and then I don't know exactly when he goes to get these metalsmithing classes, because he does work for Elvis up through the 70s. But at some point, Elvis tells him, yeah, you should go forward with this art. And he enrolled in classes at the Memphis Art Academy. And I believe, I'm going to say something that I have not researched and no proof for, but I believe that the man who created the Jesus statue in resin that is in the meditation garden today, that was given to Elvis for Christmas, I don't remember what year, I want to say 68 or 69, by the Memphis Mafia. The man who created that, I think he taught at the Memphis Art Academy. And there are interviews with that man on YouTube where he talks about making that Jesus statue and how they wanted it carved from stone, but there just wasn't enough time. So that's just an aside. And maybe it wasn't the Memphis Art Academy, but I think he was. So I think there are multiple links to Elvis to the Memphis Art Academy. And Chillin in Canada says it was probably a good horse that she got up on. I bet it was. I bet it was the best horse that they had. because who would want to risk that Priscilla Presley would be hurt? We can see almost the same clip we saw before. It looks like maybe just previous to the clip we saw, but this one's in color. And I don't know if it's been colorized or they really took it in color. It kind of looks like they took it in color. And Priscilla's sticking her tongue out of her mouth in this one, so she's absolutely having some fun, making some faces at the camera. And you can see that this horse blanket is red. It's a vibrant red on Domino's black. And that she is wearing a pink sweater. Now, the pink in her sweater and kind of the red of that blanket are the two colors that are telling me maybe this was colorized out of a black and white footage like we saw before. And Keith says Priscilla is exactly 80 years old. Now, Marty Lacker, who was in the inner circle and did accounting and paperwork type stuff for Elvis, in 1978, he said about Alan Fortas, who was another member of the inner circle, and if you've been following this series, you've met Alan Fortas, but Marty's basically going to reintroduce him to us right here. He says Alan Fortas became ranch manager and did a marvelous job. Even when we went to Hollywood, Alan stayed at the ranch. He seemed a natural for the job, and he said he really liked it. So Alan Fortas, while they made clam bake, he stayed back at the ranch, and that's one of the reasons that he was not at the wedding on May 1st in Las Vegas, because he wasn't in California. So on screen, we can now see Priscilla. This is, I believe, sometime in the 1980s, the late 80s. Not sure the exact date, but she's riding a horse. It's not Domino. And she's on a beach somewhere. And you can see the ocean and the waves behind her, or at least a large body of water. And she's riding bareback, just like Mike McGregor described. So this is a skill that Priscilla has. Now, Jerry Schilling, he says about Alan Fortas, we'd all been using the prescribed uppers and downers to keep up with the lifestyle we were in. And there had been a few scary moments. So before we go any further, let's just talk about what Jerry's already revealed to us. And I think the most important word here is we. But he says we had all been using the prescribed uppers and downers. Who's prescribing these uppers and downers? He doesn't mention that. But they all are using prescribed uppers and downers. Who's getting the prescription? Is it all Elvis's prescription? Is that what Jerry's trying to tell us? Or is Jerry trying to tell us that they all had prescriptions? Jerry's packed a lot into just that little part of the statement. You know, there was something, whatever was going on was a group activity. It wasn't anything that any one of them was doing by themselves, and it wasn't anything that any of them felt was wrong at the time. Jerry's careful to use the word prescribed. Medically, somebody told them, you need this pill to get up and you need this pill to go to sleep because of the lifestyle that you live. But then Jerry says there'd been a few scary moments. Well, what does that mean? Why would there be scary moments? And Elizabeth says the picture that we're looking at of Priscilla looks like a photo shoot of some type. Absolutely. This is absolutely a photo shoot. I think it's probably for publicity, for... I'm not exactly sure what for. I'm thinking maybe a movie production or a television show she was associated with at the time. Or it may have been for like a magazine spread for an article that she was in. Picture was just out there kind of by itself, but obviously it came from somewhere. Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And in this picture, we can see Priscilla, and I think that's Domino. And she's holding Domino's head, or scratching his nose at least. A very up-close picture of Domino's head. And Keith had said that the horse had water boots on. Yeah, I noticed that too, and I was wondering if that was her insistence, or if that was whoever brought the horse, or if that, I don't know that that was even her horse, or if that's something that's required if you're in a professional photo shoot with a horse on a beach, because obviously they have a lot of rules concerning how you treat animals now, or even in the 80s they had rules. But let's move forward with what Jerry Schilling is saying about the prescribed uppers and downers and the scary moments. So I think we've got to interpret the scary moments as the prescribed medication was used outside of the prescribed use. You're supposed to take so many, and more than that number were taken. Or they were taken for a purpose other than to awaken or to fall asleep. And that led to some scary moments. Hi, Luann. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. It is 3:22 p.m. And Jerry says Alan Fortis, who had refused to give me any sleeping pills when I started with the guys because he knew the damage they were doing to his system, spun out of control one night in Los Angeles and had to be taken to the emergency room. He became so violent with the doctors and nurses that it was up to Richard Davis and me to restrain him so he could be sedated. So Jerry says that Alan Fortis, he knew that there were bad effects from the drugs that he was prescribed to be taking. We happen to know from what Alan has told us before in previous episodes that his personal doctor in Memphis is Dr. Nicopolis. But I don't think that's Alan's only doctor. He's probably shopped around in order to fulfill his needs for the drugs. And none of these doctors have caught on, because I don't think any of them purposely are providing pills as part of a pill factory. They might have been, because that kind of thing did go on. But I think in that case, they would have provided all the pills you needed. You wouldn't have had to shop around. So I think these guys were going to multiple doctors and in different cities and in different states. And that way they were fulfilling multiple prescriptions in order to feed their own needs, because they're not using the prescriptions as prescribed, as Jerry has hinted at with a few scary moments. And the fact that Alan knows that these sleeping pills are doing something to him. And then they're saying he spins out of control on the sleeping pills. Now that seems weird to me. I don't know a lot about drugs, but I think you tend to spin out of control on the uppers and not the downers. When you spin out of control on the downers, you like fall asleep. Now, I'm not an expert on drugs, so if any of you know differently, feel free to let me know so that I could understand this better. But when Jerry connects sleeping pills to spinning out of control, that doesn't ring true with me. But that he took some pills and he's out of control and they had to be taken to the emergency room. And that he was violent. So again, that doesn't... Tranquilizers don't typically send you into violence, I don't think. Again, I'm not an expert. But he became so violent that the two grown men had to hold him down so that they could put a needle into his arm and sedate him. So there were problems going on, and this happened before Circle G Ranch. This was in Los Angeles, and this is why Alan ends up back in Memphis, and this is why Alan stays in Memphis at Circle G Ranch. And Luann says that Elvis looked more cheery and healthier in his movies than when he was on stage in the 70s because the stage shows are so hectic. That's a good point, Luann. That as chaotic and fast-paced as the movie environment was, it was very planned and regimented. But out there on the stage, it was up to Elvis what he was going to do during the performance each night. And he put a lot of energy into it. On screen, we can see a picture of Priscilla. And I believe that, again, is Domino. It's not the greatest picture in the world, but you can see all of Domino in this picture. And Priscilla. And Billy Smith says about Alan Fortas, Alan used to have this little bitty riding mower, a tractor. He was bad about taking sleeping pills. And one day he took a bunch of them and he got on the tractor and he went plumb to sleep. Fell right off that sucker. And Chillin' in Canada says, yes, it is possible to experience a lack of control or unusual, potentially dangerous behaviors when taking sleeping pills. These are known as complex sleep behaviors or parasomnias. That's interesting. See, I didn't know that at all. But it seems like it might have been more common that he just went plumb to sleep. At least that's what he did in this story with Billy Smith. And he'd fall right off the lawnmower. And apparently this was something he did more than once. And Keith is asking if Elvis was around or had any knowledge of these incidents. Well, I don't know. Jerry didn't mention. I would assume he did because Elvis paid the hospital bills. They had to go through Vernon. So eventually Elvis was going to find out. I'm sure Vernon told him if he hadn't already heard. And obviously, Elvis gave Alan the job as foreman for a reason. Because Alan wasn't going back out on the road. And Chillin' in Canada is telling us that a lot of these complex sleep behaviors happen while you are still mostly asleep and unaware of your actions. That's very interesting. Now, Marty Lacker, who we've already heard tell us about Alan Fortas, but what he said about Alan Fortas that we heard, That was back in 1978, shortly after Elvis died. Now, in the mid 1990s, Marty's story had, well, it differs. Let's take a look at it. Alan didn't know anything about running a ranch, but there was nothing much to do. Just be sure the grass was cut. Elvis liked everything manicured like a golf course, and he wanted the cattle to be fed. He didn't want them to graze. So Alan took care of all of that. But he was always full of pills down there. Alan had a different personality when he had too many pills in him. So if we contrast that to what Marty said the first time, which was Alan Fortas became ranch manager and did a marvelous job. He seemed a natural for the job and said he really liked it. And then later on, 20 years later, a little less, Marty says Alan didn't know anything about running a ranch. But there was nothing much to do, just be sure the grass was cut. But Billy says he was having trouble cutting that grass because he'd fall asleep and fall off the lawnmower. And Marty says Alan really liked that job. Well, I bet he did because his wife lived there on the ranch with him, his brand new wife. So it was a honeymoon period for him. And he didn't have to deal with all the stress of being out there on the road. And it would have been one extremely stressful trip for him because Elvis fell and hit his head and had a concussion while he was just before they started to film Clam Bake. And so Alan would have been a part of that. He would have been a part of that meeting with the colonel that was so terrible. I'm not sure Alan could have handled that at the moment. So it's a blessing that Alan stayed behind in Memphis. And if he was going to stay behind on any trip, that's probably a good one. And here's a picture of Priscilla with, again, I believe, Domino. And he appears to have that red blanket on. So maybe that red is the proper color. And maybe that indicates the pink that she had on in that previous picture was the proper color. Now there's a house behind them, a structure, a building. I don't know what house that is. Is that Graceland? You could see the pillars in front of it. And so is she over in the field next to Graceland? And maybe the barn is right behind her and we can't see it? It might be Graceland. I just don't know. Let me know what you think. And Luann says that she reckons if those who take sleeping pills and do something, maybe you can't feel it, but others can notice. Right, you start to drift off and others notice that your eyes are closing, you're not paying any attention, but to you, you're still fully awake. I do believe that happens on the sleeping pills. And Keith says maybe it's Vernon's home. No, that's not Vernon's house. Well, no, his house looked more like a barn on the top. It has more of a barn roof to where it goes up in sections and has a little flat part at the top and then comes down. It's not quite like this, I don't think. But I do see that area in the fence that you would think of as maybe a gate to Vernon's house. But Vernon's house also faces the street. So the gate is behind it, not to the side. And Jerry Schilling tells us about the Colonel. And I think what Jerry's telling us is from before the wedding, before Clam Bake. And this is something, at the time that I read it, and I put it into the script, I had no idea where it really went in the timeline. And I think it's foreshadowing to us the letter that the colonel sends to Marty telling him he knows that he's doing drugs and there's a demotion coming if he can't get himself together. Hi, Pamela. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate seeing you here, and I am so sorry to hear about your husband. That is very sad. I hope that you are doing well. And thank you so much for coming. And here's what Jerry Schilling says about the colonel. Elvis's attempt at seclusion got the colonel's attention. He was furious that Elvis was going incommunicado and messing with business as usual. He put a good deal of pressure on Marty Lacker to guarantee that Elvis would follow through on the schedule and responsibilities that his film contract demanded. So I think that is Jerry telling us that he knows that Marty received a letter or at least a lot of flack from the colonel, probably because Marty told him at some point. And Jerry goes on. Elvis was not going to be able to escape being Elvis just by riding horses, and Elvis knew it. The more he thought about what he would be leaving the ranch to go back to, and Jerry's referring to going back to film Clambake, the more it must have torn him apart inside. But when Elvis took enough of some of the pills prescribed to him, he didn't have to think about anything at all. Now, in this section, Jerry has revealed to us the effect of some of the pills that they take. Because remember, Jerry's already told us that they're all doing prescription drugs. They're all doing it. And here he talks about pills prescribed to Elvis. They're all getting the same kind of pills, uppers and downers. And Jerry's telling us that when Elvis takes enough of them, they blank him out, and he doesn't have to think about the problems of the day. Well, they're not the only one. He's not the only one that these pills are blanking out. You know, they're working on Jerry too. Jerry knows this effect because Jerry uses them for this effect. Chillin' in Canada says, you have to consider that with long-term use, you develop immunity and you take larger doses. And that's true too. So that's why they can't all be feeding off of Elvis's prescriptions, because they all are using such large doses that they're all required to go doctor shopping in order to fulfill their own needs for the recreational use, which has now become addiction for some of them. It's not all of them. I don't think Jerry's ever addicted. He's a user. He uses. I think Elvis uses. And then he gets to a point where he requires certain medication because of physical conditions that he has, and that transition is basically seamless. So to an outsider, or even these insiders, he just appears to be continuing to use drugs. If that's why he was using them in the first place. Because remember, there's only one guy in this group who has to get up and get in front of the camera every day. There's only one guy that has to perform. There's only one guy that has to get up and has to go to sleep. And that's Elvis. All the rest of them are just following and tagging along. And so Jerry, he describes the feeling that Elvis is getting, but what we know for sure is that they're all getting this feeling at some point. They've probably all talked about it. It's part of the culture once you begin to do it. And this is a shared experience between them. So whenever Jerry sees Elvis taking pills for anything, much like Sonny West, it's immediately assumed it's for the same reasons that they've always taken the pill. Now, Marty Lacker says Elvis was at the ranch. This was when it was snowing, and he'd really gone nuts buying all those trucks and giving them away. So I think we've got to put this story back before Clambake as well. Back when Jerry was talking about Elvis using these pills to forget, and not so he doesn't have to think about going back to Clambake. And that's kind of when he was buying most of the trucks. And Marty would hopefully remember that accurately because he filled out the paperwork for most of the trucks. And Gunn says exactly, there was only one guy that had to get up and perform every day. And Keith said that Elvis knew when the pills didn't give him a kick, and Billy Smith had said he put placebos in Elvis's pill bottles, and EP knew. What do you think that did to the trust between Elvis and Billy Smith, if Elvis knew that? Why would Elvis continue to trust Billy Smith at all if he knew that Billy had stolen his drugs and replaced them with placebos? And if Elvis was an addict, there's no way he would have kept Billy around if he knew that. Addicts do not allow you to mess with their stash. That is a no-no for them. They cannot accept that under any circumstances. So there is this placebo story, and it involves hypodermic needles and replacing the contents of capsules. And I've looked into that a little bit in the sense that I have access to the internet and I've looked things up, right? Not that I've actually gotten any hypodermic needles or tried it or anything like that, but the consensus that I find is that it's ridiculous and impossible. That you cannot stick a hypodermic needle into one of these capsules and suck anything out and then replace it. And the mere thought is ludicrous. That the capsules, even then, were designed to be tamper-proof so that no one could do something like that. Because that's the kind of thing that leads to people dying. And then it being attached to your brand name. And I don't remember if anybody here remember or know if anybody remembers like the Tylenol scares in the 80s, but Tylenol had a terrible time getting over that kind of thing. And it was similar to this where things have been replaced and it wasn't the right stuff that people were taking. So this idea of this placebo thing, there's a bunch of them in on this story, including Dr. Nick. So it, and Al, his last name's escaping me at the moment, but the valet from the very end, Al, they've all are part of this placebo thing. And when they say it, they have straight faces, but it's just not possible. But that's a whole different story. And if I'm really going to tell that one right, I'd have to get it all in line and in order like I do with the rest of this so that I know exactly what I'm talking about. But that is a rough idea if you really begin to think about it, that anyone could have done that. Now, Al says he flushed an entire suitcase of drugs down a toilet, that he stayed in the bathroom for hours to do that. Now, I'm not a plumber, but I'm not sure you even could do that. Maybe you could. I don't know. I've never tried it, but that seems like an awful lot of pills to be flushing down your plumbing system. But he testified to that in court. And one day we'll look at those transcripts. But to get back to this story, because this one's connected to drugs as well, because we're in that cycle within the Circle G where we've got to get these stories out of the way, we've got to deal with them. And I didn't know if this happened when they first got to Circle G or at the end because it was snowing. And he does come back for Christmas. But this snowing is connected to the trucks, and we now know that was back in February. And Gunn says the placebo story shows that Elvis wasn't an addict. I agree. Although I don't think it's true at all. So there's that too. Now, did Dr. Nick order placebos that looked just like another pill? That is possible. But I don't think they were even doing that in the medical community at that time. And he doesn't exactly say that's what he did. And Marion says that she agrees if EP was an addict, he could never have tolerated that. And Luann says that she wonders if all the pills that Elvis had taken didn't interfere with his fertility. Well, if Priscilla's story is accurate, and Priscilla and Elvis never had relations prior to the date of their marriage, based on the date of Lisa's birth, then I would say no, it didn't bother him at all. Didn't interfere with that in any way. Although it does seem odd there's no other kids out there, right? But it did not interfere with that in any way because whatever they did that night seems to have been fine. And Chillin says that she thinks there was an overlap between dependency and addiction with Elvis's medication. I think that's a good way to put it too. I think you might even map it as careless recreational use that wasn't illegal. And it wasn't immoral or unethical. It was basically supported by the studio system in most of America. And everybody in that period was basically recklessly using it for recreational purposes. Or for whatever reason they determined, you bought it over the counter for a long time. But then I probably did move into some dependency, which is an addiction. It's, you know, it's something that you like, and you like it so much. It's more like smoking cigarettes, which I guess is an addiction. Well, there is a physical addiction there. So it'd be more like vaping a non-tobacco product. Then it's just a habit, but it might be habit forming, and you'll want to continue that habit. But it wasn't that he had to have it or he'd go into physical withdrawals. But I think that towards the end, he also wouldn't have gone into withdrawals, but the effects of his medical conditions would have been so severe that he wouldn't have been able to function. Like the pain would have been too much. And Gunn says that perhaps everyone else could have used it instead of putting the drugs into the toilet. Well, that's my other question. What happened to all these drugs that they put the placebos in for? Where'd they all go? I mean, how many of them could you have done with a hypodermic needle, and they weren't all capsules? So if you took tablets and you replaced them with other tablets, what happened to the first batch of tablets? Well, among a group of addicts, those would be put to good use. So then the question becomes, was it for the good of Elvis Presley that pills were being replaced, or was it for the fun of other people? Because this same kind of thing happens in nursing homes and hospitals every day by nurses who are in charge of the medication, or others within the facility that become addicted and find ways to get into the cabinets that have these drugs. But when you're in charge of administering them to patients, and those patients don't have a good memory like in a nursing home, it's possible to siphon some of those drugs off and then use them for yourself, and nobody knows the better, except for the patient who suffers because they didn't get their medication. So it's kind of a similar thing happening here. Elvis is getting the medication, but it's not the right medication because it's been replaced. But what are you doing with the real medication? It gets very tricky when you have a bunch of addicts all telling you stories about somebody else's drug use. And now, am I saying that Billy Smith used these drugs as well? Well, I don't know. Do you think that Jerry Schilling is excluding Billy Smith when he says they're all doing it? Billy's in Hollywood with the rest of them. Is he excluded? Is he not doing it, even though they're all doing it? And Gunn says that she thinks they used it themselves for the fun of other people, surely. Yeah, it's just like, what if they'd replaced his cash with play money? What happened to the real cash? That part of the story is just forgotten. What if you replaced his rings with replicas? Because you didn't want him to lose them on stage. Where are the real rings? We would immediately ask that, but nobody asked what happened to the real drugs. Geraldo never did. He just accepted the placebo stories and publicized them. And in this story, Marty says one day Elvis called me, or he asked me to call Dr. Max Shapiro. Now, we know Dr. Max Shapiro because when Elvis gets to Hollywood, he's a little overweight for this clam bake. Well, they get a hold of Dr. Max Shapiro in Beverly Hills, who immediately handles the situation with a prescription for some kind of weight loss drug, which we're all guessing is amphetamine. That's what they used back then for weight loss. And Max is famous for his amphetamine cocktails that he will inject into you. So I don't know what kind of pills that he would prescribe, but he prescribed some kind of weight loss pills, something that they were probably all using at the studio. So we know Dr. Max. But we're not going to find out the interaction between Marty and Dr. Max today because we have again come to the end of another hour. And this is a long story, and I want to make sure that we tell it the right way so that we can understand what's going on, because again, it's got a lot of the stuff about the drugs in it. And I want us to make sure we put the proper amount of investigation into this. So I'm going to leave it there for today. And Chillin' in Canada says she always wondered if some of them supplemented their income with the surplus, as if they sold it to others. I would, I'm not saying there were no financial interactions like that within that kind of group, there typically would be. But I don't think it was the driving force behind getting the pills, because it's hard for addicts to let go of these pills unless they're the ones they don't use. They're the ones they don't like. If you got a whole bunch of uppers and downers and you're really an upper guy, yeah, you'll sell the downers, but you'll never sell the uppers unless you got so many you think that maybe you could use that money to go buy more, and you'll sell them too and make even more. That kind of thing happens. So yeah, sometimes they get sold. So I wouldn't, but I don't think that was the major reason. I think it was probably to use it themselves. And Gunn says she thinks they stole it from Elvis. Well, Billy admits they stole it. When you see the clip of Billy say it, and it's from the late 90s or the mid 90s, and he says, if you say that that means I stole from Elvis Presley, then yes, I stole from Elvis Presley. So he does say he stole the drugs. He says it was to keep Elvis from doing it. And maybe everyone that Billy took kept him from doing it. Now, I can't really say that. I don't know that Billy took any of them. I can't say that any of them took any of them. I can only say that I know that Jerry told us that they were all doing prescription drugs, that this was a shared activity, and I don't think they all magically stopped before 1977. I just don't think that that's the reality of the situation. And Keith says, what was Billy doing with the real deal pills? And again, I don't think Dr. Nick was taking any pills. And I don't really think he was reselling any pills. It just doesn't seem very Dr. Nick, and he doesn't seem to think that way from what I've seen of Dr. Nick. But I didn't know Dr. Nick, so can't really say. But that's where we're going to leave all the speculation for today. And I'm going to send everybody out of here with another song. And this time, we will do a song about trust in motion, which is about cars that Elvis loved and gifted to his friends. Until I see you all again, you all keep on taking care of business.
Radio static, Memphis bound, WABQ homes a sacred sound. Green, green grass, again and again. The DJ's risk for a loyal friend. Elvis smiles, no words exchanged, just a test of love on a range. Keys in the dark, showroom and glow. A Cadillac waits in a silent show. Merry Christmas, GK said. A yellow chariot, tears unshed. What's fame and fortune worth, my friend, if it's not something we can lend? The Chevy Impala, still shining new. Passed from Klein to the Circle G crew. Gary